It seemed a lifetime ago when she crossed those very mountains, coming east into the unfamiliar desert and the unknown. So much had changed since then, since she had been that little, naive girl whose only wish was to have an adventure like her father. But adventures have a way of changing people. The sure become uncertain, the steady waver, the invincible are broken. Her eyes were now open, and they had seen too much to go back.
Hi everyone, I'm Nikki, the author.
And I'm Mina, the friend that's never read the book.
Welcome to Behind the Quill, the podcast that takes you on a behind-the-scenes journey into the minds of writers. Hosted by me, Nikki Wilcom, and Mina Pro, this show dives deep into the creative process, revealing the stories, struggles, and secrets behind the pages.
Whether you're a writer yourself, a book lover, or just curious of how stories come to life, join Nikki and myself, Mina Pro, as we chat with authors, share experiences, and explore everything that goes into making magic with words.
In every episode, we'll be pulling back the curtain to reveal the highs, lows, and plot twists of the writing life. From the spark of inspiration to the final draft, no part of the process is off limits.
So grab your favorite pen, a cup of tea, and get ready for an intimate and candid look at what happens behind the quill. Welcome to episode 4 of Behind the Quill, where we are going to do a deep dive into the art of character development. We touched on this a little bit in the previous episodes where we introduced Nikki's books, and she's back in the studio with me today.
Hey everybody, yes, we are back for episode 4. And neither one of us are sick now, which is awesome because we were both getting over colds when we did our first round of recording.
I know, you could hear all the sniffles. So we had the table over here full of tissues and cold medicine and tea. We couldn't get our mics to even work that day. And then when we finally did, we were both constantly leaning away and coughing and trying not to be picked up on the mics.
Oh my gosh, is that why in our intro you say grab a cup of tea? Because we had tea?
Exactly. But I got coffee today. So grab your cup of coffee, y'all.
My mind is spinning right now, you guys. I just realized this. Mina's just coming for my job, you guys. I underestimated her. That is fantastic.
Well, maybe we should switch to wine then.
Yeah, we should. I like that idea. The next time we record, it should be an evening sesh. I'll bring a bottle over. We would end up changing the name to Behind the Bottle instead of Behind the Quill. This is great.
Now, let's see. Where do we start? Do you drink wine usually when you're...
No, I don't usually drink when I'm writing. For one thing, it's usually 10 in the morning, and I like to be focused when I'm writing, and wine has the opposite effect.
So anyways, getting back to the characters, where do your ideas come from when you're writing these characters?
So I talked a little bit before in the episode introducing the books about how when I have an idea for a story, it usually starts with some kind of conflict or event, something major that happens in the story. I can see that conflict in my head, and I use it like a focal point. And in the beginning, there's characters already involved, but they're like these little ghosts drifting around. So I pick one, and I have to start figuring out how this person, this character, is related to the conflict. It's usually the protagonist, as you could guess, and then I'll start figuring out some of the details for that person, and I'll pick another ghost, and this one usually ends up being a second protagonist or a villain, and then I have to figure out how they relate to the conflict and the main protagonist, and then it just keeps going.
So you usually start by making these characters from scratch after you've figured out how they relate to the main story conflict. So how do you even get started with that, with designing who these people even are?
Well, I imagine it's kind of like how you put together a choreography for a dance. I mean, I don't know your process. I don't know if you start with a song first or a pose first.
I mean, you can go either way. We tend to lean a lot on the music. I mean, as you know, there are some songs that just make you feel like shaking your booty, and there's some songs that make you feel like you need to slink around like the Pink Panther. So we tend to lean heavily on what the characteristics or the vibe of the music is before we lean into choreography.
Right, so you have an arsenal of different moves you can use for a specific type of dance or music, right? And there's a million different ways they can go together. So with developing these characters, I have my own arsenal of personality traits and details I can use to start painting the picture of who these characters are. So their role in the story is where I usually start, and then I can start brushing on these different traits to see what works best for the story and for the other characters.
So what do you do to avoid creating stereotypical characters?
So stereotypes are oversimplified or generalized beliefs about a group of people, right? And they're usually viewed negatively because they can reduce a person down to those cliched traits, and that can be harmful. You know, I don't want to perpetuate those stereotypes in my characters. I don't want that. It's about getting beyond the stereotypes when you're writing. If you only go surface deep with these characters, of course you're going to be at risk for putting your characters into certain stereotypes because they lack the complexity and nuance of real people. Mm-hmm. Creating well-rounded characters with unique backgrounds, experiences, and motivations helps break away from cliches and, add depth to them. You want an authentic character. And sometimes that means doing research, especially if your character comes from a background or culture you have very little knowledge of.
So when we're talking about one of your main characters, let's say Haven, being this dark and broody type, having this reluctant hero personality, that isn't a stereotype, right?
That is actually a trope. So tropes and stereotypes are similar, but they're not the same. A trope is something that can be used like a pattern or a common theme that is familiar, yes, but it can be used to enhance a story, and it's not inherently negative. They're way more flexible than stereotypes. They're common themes, yes, like, let's say, the love triangle, the mentor figure, the reluctant hero, like Haven, and you can see these themes everywhere. But they allow for so much more creativity to take place than stereotypes do. Mm-hmm. In Haven's case, his reluctant hero journey starts way before we even meet him. So for this trope, some common elements are that initial hesitation or doubt that makes him want to avoid that call to adventure or responsibility. Mm-hmm. And then there's some kind of external influence or moral obligation, which pushes them towards that journey, right? So when we meet Haven, we learn that he was really reluctant to go to Empyria in the first place, and he's kind of guilt-tripped into going. We see his dark and broody personality there, and if that's all there was to it and to him, then yeah, he would have swung over to the more stereotypical side of things. In his reluctance, though, there's depth, right? You get to see his internal conflict, and part of that is the stereotypes his own people have about him, and every time he fails or makes a mistake, it feeds that view of himself, that he's a monster, that he's not worthy, that he's not capable of protecting anyone. But with the reluctant hero journey, there's always some kind of transformation and growth. And for Haven, that really comes when he confronts what happens in the marshlands before leaving for Empyria. And we get to see that in a flashback from his point of view. And Tamsin is a character, I think, that really kind of unknowingly helps him with this. But she is, I would say, even more of the reluctant hero than Haven is. Her arc is a lot more gradual than Haven's, whereas a lot of his takes place in the first book. Tamsin doesn't even get to the beginning of her reluctant hero arc until the end of the Dark Solstice. But she does go through some development in the first book. Otherwise, she would be a pretty flat main character.
So what even is her arc in the first book then?
She starts to grow up. She starts to shed this naivety about the world. She goes through a major emotional event and has to navigate the fallout of that. And I thought it would be interesting to play with both of their reluctant hero arcs. This is where the creativity can really jump in. So I thought with Haven, what would happen if right when he was on the brink of transformation, at that peak about to be triumphant, if he was cut down? If by some external force beyond his control, if he was denied the fulfillment of that hero's journey, what would happen? It becomes a catalyst for Tamsin's journey. It sets up her arc for the next two books because she's the longevity character, the main character for the series.
You talked before of your characters being heavily influenced by their backgrounds. Do you usually have a good idea of what those backgrounds are before the characters when you start?
Yeah, so the characters' backgrounds don't usually come into the mix right away. I tend to work backwards, and I like to get a feel for a character's personality first. Like, how is this certain character going to behave right now in the present? Then I can start to ask the questions that naturally come up, like, why do they have this kind of personality? Why do they behave like this? What is their background story, and how did it influence them into becoming who they are now? How is their past going to affect them going forward?
So, which character do you think you have the most backstory for?
Haven, definitely. And Tamsin. Though I give a lot of backstory on Tamsin's father, Lord Urbane, too.
Why Lord Urbane?
Because his past is a huge reason why everything is happening in the first place. He lived in Empyria once before, and he had contact with Haven's people long before Tamsin was born. He's held on to a lot of secrets over the years, and it's become part of the nuances of his character. We initially view him only through Tamsin's eyes, and she worships him. He's kind of up on this untouchable pedestal, but as time goes on and things progress, more of these secrets come out, and we realize that, oh, he's very much human like the rest of us. And through the first three books, we see these revelations about his character as the other characters are finding out. And it not only affects him as he starts scrambling a little bit to hang on to the life he's built, but it has a ripple effect throughout everything. You know, I was even playing with the idea of giving him a prequel book back when this was only going to be a trilogy. And I still might, I don't know. But that should tell you how much information I have for him, you know?
So the prequel book would just be about Lord Urbane's life.
Essentially, yeah. It would be about the events that are spoken about a little bit in the main books that led to what's happening now. And Lord Urbane is a huge part of that, 100%. But there's other characters as well, like Lord Savine and Lavinia and Erin, who are very much involved in the shaping of the events that are taking place now. And I know you don't know who those other people are, because you haven't read the books. But I don't want to spoil it for others who haven't read them yet either. But what I can say is that the clues are already there in the first two chapters, and the prologue too, in the very first book, about who these people are to each other and some of the secrets they're keeping that are going to have a severe impact on our main characters. And if you've read the books already, I bet if you go back, you'll be able to spot the exact details I'm talking about. So this prequel would be about those characters and how and why those secrets were created in the first place. As I'm talking about it, I'm going to talk myself into writing this book. I'm going to be in this world forever. I can't leave at this point.
You heard it, guys. Expect prequel books now with history on more characters.
Oh, goodness.
Or start getting ready to write your fanfics, because remember what we said in earlier episodes, Nikki will feel like she made it as an author once fanfics start.
Oh, yes, the fan fictions.
The peak.
My other projects will never be finished now. This is what happens when you build a fantasy world. There's so many places you can go. You can jump around in time. You can create spin-off novels from secondary characters. You can build whole civilizations and stories from places you've only hinted at. And we talked a lot about world building in the last episode, about creating these environments and these spaces and stories to explore. But we didn't talk about how to get out of them. There's no exit sign. There's no off-ramp.
There's no way out.
I don't know how I'm going to extract myself from this world when I finish the series. I can't imagine not thinking about these characters every day. I've known them longer than I've known you. Isn't that crazy?
Well, I mean, you and I have talked a little bit about this. There are so many directions that you could go down where you can continue to build off of this world. Stories off of minor characters and their background stories. Side quests that could happen along the way that we don't even know affects the main storyline.
Ooh, but I know.
You know, it's already done. It's in your head. It's on your murder board. It's everywhere. But there's so many different directions and spin-offs and more information you can put out there eventually for your readers.
I know. I went down a rabbit hole there. Wow, sorry guys. Let's get back on track. Get us back on track, Mina Pro.
All right, here we go. So, getting us back to these characters like Lord Urbane, who you said has a lot of secrets and a whole backstory. How important is it to really give your characters these flaws and weaknesses?
It's really important. It makes them relatable. It makes them human. A lot of times we connect over our struggles, right? That's how you connect your reader with your character. If your character never experiences doubt or fear or doesn't make any mistakes, then they don't feel real. I'm not rooting for the perfect, liked by everyone, flawless character because people aren't perfect. I'm not perfect. And people want to see themselves represented in the characters they read, even in fantasy. I would say especially in fantasy. One of the pushbacks I hear from people who don't read fantasy is that they think it's all about dragons or elves or these creatures, and they're just not interested in those things. Underneath that, what I hear is the question, how on earth would I have anything in common with a dragon? Or how could I ever relate to a character who lives on some make-believe planet? And maybe that's true. Maybe they just don't have an interest in fantasy, and that's fine. That's okay. But if the writer does their job and they do it well, they should be able to get the reader to care about that dragon or that character. It's about empathy. It's about connection and the reader seeing themselves within the story. Then all the fantasy elements just enhance the story, not detract from it.
Can you give me an example of a character flaw that added a lot of depth to the storyline?
So let's go with Tamsin. One of the main character flaws that I gave her is that she doubts herself a lot. And this leads to her being indecisive. And this is something we all experience, right? I relate to this a lot. And in my life, being indecisive frustrates me so much. But when I'm writing these characters, I love it. When I'm working with Tamsin, it allows me to explore so much of her internal conflict. So how this is woven into her character is that we go back to her backstory first. She comes from this society where she's meant to be seen, not heard. All of her decisions are made for her up to this point. Where she lives, who she's going to marry, who she can be seen socializing with, all that stuff. So when she's put into these situations where she starts to have some autonomy. We start to see these doubts and indecisiveness come to the forefront. And she's not unintelligent. She simply lacks experience, and sometimes she makes mistakes. She chooses wrong because with some of these choices, she can't rely solely on her moral compass. It's a lot more complicated than that.
It sounds like these flaws are great for writing internal conflict, but how does that factor into the larger external conflicts?
They go hand in hand. So a good example would be during the second book when Tamsin is in the marshlands. For a while, she still kind of gives up control to everyone else. She lets others make the decisions for her about the best way to rescue Haven and how to get there. She's then put into this leadership position after a little while, and she starts to realize that just because she's in this role doesn't mean that she has any power unless she starts making these decisions on her own. So she's learning how to navigate that, and her indecisiveness and doubt is pretty transparent, not just to her, but to others. And when there's other people out there that don't necessarily think she should be there or even like her, that's something they're going to latch onto, and they try to use that against her.
So how do you differentiate between character development and character description?
So character development is about the growth and change a character undergoes, while character description involves the physical and personality traits. Development is dynamic and unfolds over time, whereas description provides static information about the character. So part of Tamsin's personality is that she's indecisive, right? That's part of her description. Turning that into part of her development, though, is where elements of her story arc take place. Turning indecisiveness into decisiveness is part of her growth. That's what we want to see in her character. Every time she faces a decision is going to be a key moment in her arc, and how quickly and decisively she responds is going to propel that trajectory. But that's not to say she's never going to choose wrong anymore. It's not about if she's wrong or right. It's about developing that confidence within her and that acceptance and ownership of the outcome.
So now, being a serial writer, how hard is it to handle character development over the course of multiple books?
It's hard. It has a lot to do with the pace of the book and balancing the internal conflicts with the external action. And you have to figure out not just the overall arc for the character, but the arc within each book in the series. And if you're like me and you like to give yourself more work, you create a multiple point of view series. So you don't have just one character you're figuring all this out for, but many. I mean, not all of the characters are going to get the same treatment. Some arcs are more detailed than others, and some even get multiple arcs.
And that's when the spin-off books happen. When you have all these different arcs for characters and stories to follow through on. Now, how do you decide when a character's development is complete within the storyline?
When they get killed off. Then they're done.
When they die.
I'm kidding. I think a character's development is done when they've reached the peak of their transformation, as it aligns with the story's theme, if that makes sense. So their journey should feel purposeful and satisfying. There's got to be some kind of closure there.
Do you kill a lot of characters off?
Not a lot, just an average amount.
That's what I'm getting from you right now. That's the vibe, the murderous Nikki vibe. That's why she's got the murder boards, guys. She's plotting how to kill her characters off.
It's more difficult to kill off a character than you'd think, because you can't reverse it. So I talked about this a little bit before, about there being a difference between writing yourself out of a corner and taking an easy way out. One is believable and one is not, right? And I used killing off a character as an example. So in the first book, yeah, I'll just go into it. Spoilers ahead, guys.
Wee-oo, spoiler alert.
So right away in the prologue, the whole story begins with the death of a lord. It's very clear that's what happens, and this is because this is the first domino in the string of events that takes place. Without this, Lord Urbane never needs to go back to Empyria. Tamsin never meets Haven. Story done in one chapter. But this is setting up the theme of death as a catalyst. And this happens later on in the book when Tamsin hears that her father has died from Cornelius at the Lord's Ball. Previously, her father had left to go to the dam, and apparently there was an attack from the Medine. And this is a turning point for her because she figures out that Cornelius is lying to her, and there's a much bigger plot against her father and the Medine than she realized. But in the very same chapter, she and Haven are attacked by the Empyreans when they're caught fleeing the city, and Haven gets wounded pretty badly to the point where Tamsin thinks they killed him as she's being hauled off by the soldiers. Then after that, we find out that this lie about the Medine attacking the Empyreans at the dam is being perpetuated throughout the city when really it was the Empyreans that killed their own people, but made it look like the Medine did it. But all of that happens off screen, and towards the end we learn that Lord Urbane survived, and so did Haven, because he's a watcher and he's tough, and Cornelius had a reason to keep him alive, so they didn't let him die. So to bring it back to believability, right? If death as a catalyst is a theme, then I needed to bring this to our main character, and I needed Tamsin to believe it, because this is going to propel her character arc going forward. And as a reader, if you take it like Tamsin does, if you believe it, then great. That tells me you are really connected to her and to her point of view. And it's got a little shock value, right? Like, how could she kill off Haven in the first book? Right? But really, I wrote it so you don't see either one of them actually die. Being from Tamsin's perspective for this was really important. So on the surface, I hope I built up the parts and structured it the way it needed to be, so most readers at least can see the method behind it, whether they're surprised by it or not.
It sounds like one of the big climactic scenes in your book, but you said that this was going to propel her story arc in the storyline too. So what is happening underneath all of that action for Tamsin's character?
So on a deeper level, it's about removing the past, which is associated with her father, and removing her future, which she associated with Haven. So now she's stuck in this limbo state, this purgatory, which is the meaning behind the dark solstice. She's in this cocoon of grief, and this period of time isn't just about the turmoil, but what's going to emerge when it's over. When the cocoon opens, is she going to come out weaker or stronger? To put it in the simplest way possible, though we all know that grief and living through that is anything but simple. So even when she comes through the darkest parts of that and discovers that Haven and her father are both alive, there's still a change that took place, which is part of her development. I have a line in the book. Haven says it sometime about halfway through the first book, and he says, "You can't come back from death, no matter what side you're on." So the first part of that is pretty obvious. Once you're dead, you're dead.
No, there's no magic wand in this book, no magic bean, nothing.
Nope, no magic wands, no magic potions. Once you're dead, you can't come back. But in the second part of his statement, he implies that death has more than one side to it. And he's looking at it from the side of life, because he's usually the one doing the killing, saying even then, even when you're the survivor, death will still change you, meaning you can't go back to who you were before then. And then this goes even further with Tamsin, who was neither killed nor did any killing in the first book, but she was on yet another side of it and is changed because of it.
Okay, now just to be clear, because I like the dark and broody type, Haven doesn't die in the first book, right?
No, he doesn't die.
Okay, good. Okay, good. You didn't kill off my boyfriend. I just needed to be told it was a dark and broody type. I got it. It's cool.
But I think we do need a little bell or some kind of noise that goes off every time I'm about to give something away, because I'm going to forget to say spoiler alert, and then everything's going to be out in the open. You're going to start asking questions about book 4, and I'll just be like, yeah, in the 4th book, Tamsin, beep, and Haven, beep.
We're going to do that. We're going to get a little alarm or a little, like, bellman bell. I'm going to get that. Amazon. Here I go.
Ooh, maybe we should have Michael do another voiceover for the spoilers.
Ooh,
right?
That would be fun.
Michael, we have another job for you. He's doing an amazing job, you guys, with the book narrations in the beginning, by the way.
We recruited our husbands for this already.
Mm-hmm. Ooh, what if we did a husbands episode?
Yes.
We could get our husbands in the studio here. We could get Billy and Michael to come in and really give you the behind-the-scenes scoop of what it's like to be the husbands behind these 2 crazy ladies. Comment below or send me a message on my Instagram if you guys want that.
Well, let's see here. Let's wrap things up. Yeah. We will be talking more about characters in future episodes, but digging more into secondary characters and villains. But for now, let's end this episode with another review. This one is from Liz Conkle. N.L. Wilcombe opens up an amazing world with a rich and vibrant history of characters. The history between the Empyreans and the Medine slowly unravels events that led to the present. As Tamsin learns about Haven's life and this desert city, this whole other world unfolds with conspiracy, traitors, and surprising loyalty. Haven and Tamsin come from 2 different worlds. Both are outsiders in different ways, but through this they find a connection. Their budding relationship is sweet and sincere. Haven is a complex character and a favorite. See, I told you. People like him. It's that dark, broody type. Yep. See? He has a dark history. Always in the shadows, but he's also the spark that Tamsin needed in her life. And she sees him for who he is. The Dark Solstice is a compelling and addictive read with mythology, romance, and betrayal. A must-read for fantasy lovers. You heard it from Liz, y'all. It is a must-read. So if you want to avoid all the spoilers from Nikki going forward... because Nikki is going to spill in future episodes. Go get the books now.
Yes, I want to be able to give you guys all the behind-the-scenes details, but I don't want to ruin any surprises for people. It's too late for Mina, but you guys can still save yourselves.
I still haven't read the books, y'all, and we're 4 episodes into this. Anyways, if you have read the books, we would love to hear what your thoughts were on them. You can leave a comment or a review on Behind the Quill or on Nikki's personal Instagram page. If you're liking the podcast so far, please hit that subscribe button to stay updated on future episodes. Thank you, Nikki, for answering all my crazy questions today. And we will be back next time on Behind the Quill. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.
Bye.